It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a chance for us to escape the stresses of everyday life and reconnect with nature. But as we stood at the entrance of the abandoned mine, flashlights in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to make a grave mistake. The mine loomed before us, its entrance gaping like the mouth of some ancient beast, ready to swallow us whole. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides, suffocating and oppressive. Despite my misgivings, the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist, and before I knew it, we were stepping into the darkness, our footsteps echoing off the walls of the tunnel. The air grew colder with each step we took, and I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. As we delved deeper into the mine, the tunnels seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in a labyrinthine maze that seemed designed to confuse and disorient us. Every sound echoed off the walls, magnified 100-fold in the darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon the hidden chamber, tucked away in the deepest recesses of the mine like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and I could feel my stomach churn as I took in the sight before me. The chamber was filled with rows upon rows of rusted metal cages, their bars twisted and bent as though they had been subjected to unimaginable force. And within those cages lay the remains of unspeakable horrors, twisted and contorted in death as though they had suffered a fate worse than anything I could imagine. I felt bile rise in my throat as I stumbled backward, my mind reeling with the horror of what we had uncovered. It was then that I realized the true nature of the mine, the dark secret that lay hidden beneath its surface. For years, the mine had been used as a dumping ground for the unwanted, a place where the dregs of society were cast aside and forgotten. And now, trapped deep underground with no way out, I knew that we were about to become its next victims. With a sense of mounting dread, we pressed on, our only hope of survival to find a way out of the mine before it was too late. But as we navigated the twisting tunnels, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, lurking in the shadows just out of sight. And then, as we rounded a corner, we stumbled upon the source of the horror that had haunted the mine for so long. In the center of the chamber stood a figure, its form shrouded in darkness as it loomed over us like some ancient god of death. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stared into the abyssal depths of its eyes, the darkness swirling within them like a vortex of despair. And as it reached out a hand toward us, I knew that our fate had been sealed. But just as all hope seemed lost, a shaft of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the chamber in its golden glow. With a surge of adrenaline, we raced toward the exit, our only thought to escape the horrors that lurked within the depths of the mine. As we burst out into the daylight, I couldn't help but glance back at the mine one last time, the darkness seeming to retreat before the light of the sun. And as we made our way back to civilization, I knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, the memory of the horrors we had witnessed etched into our minds forever. Let's hop on to story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. The rain pounded relentlessly against the roof of the cabin, a deafening cacophony that drowned out all other sound. I sat huddled by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across the walls as I tried to block out the storm raging outside. I had been driving for hours, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I navigated the winding roads of the forest. When the storm hit, I knew I had to find shelter, and that's when I stumbled upon the cabin, its windows boarded up and its door hanging off its hinges. At first glance, the cabin seemed like the perfect refuge from the storm, a sanctuary from the elements where I could wait out the night in safety. But as the hours passed and the storm raged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking in the darkness just beyond the reach of the firelight. It started with a faint rustling, barely audible over the roar of the storm. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the wind rattling the trees outside. But as the noise grew louder and more insistent, I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of unease settling over me like a shroud. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that there was nothing out there but the howling wind and the pounding rain. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong, that there was more to the cabin and the forest that surrounded it than met the eye. As the night wore on, the noises grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the very walls of the cabin were closing in around me. I tried to block them out, to focus on the warmth of the fire and the comfort of the shelter, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of impending doom that hung heavy in the air. And then, just as I was beginning to think that I was going mad, I heard it, a soft, whispered voice, barely audible over the roar of the storm. I strained to make out the words, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened intently. At first, the voice was nothing more than a jumble of incomprehensible whispers, like the murmurs of the wind through the trees. But as I listened closer, I began to pick out individual words, phrases that sent a shiver down my spine. Come, join us, forever. The words echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in the cabin. There was something out there, something lurking in the darkness, waiting to claim its next victim. With a sense of mounting dread, I rose from my seat by the fire and crept toward the window, my heart pounding in my chest as I peered out into the darkness. And that's when I saw them, shadowy figures flitting through the trees, their eyes gleaming in the firelight as they watched me from the safety of the forest. I knew then that I had to leave, that I couldn't stay in the cabin a moment longer. But as I turned to make my escape, I felt a cold hand close around my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs as I struggled to break free. With a desperate cry, I lashed out, striking out blindly at my unseen assailant as I fought to free myself from its grasp. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the hand released its grip, and I stumbled backward, gasping for breath as I fled into the night. As I ran through the darkness, the whispers followed me, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked within the forest. But I refused to give in to fear, refused to let the darkness claim me as its own. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I emerged from the forest, battered and bruised but alive. I knew then that I had escaped the cabin and the horrors that dwelled within it, but I also knew that the memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest, my friends and I gathered around the crackling campfire at Whispering Pines Campground. We had been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of nature. Little did we know, our peaceful retreat would soon turn into a nightmare. The campground was nestled deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, miles away from civilization and surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch on forever. It was the perfect place to get away from it all, or so we thought. As darkness fell, a chill settled over the campground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I brushed off the sensation as nothing more than nerves, attributing it to the eerie stillness of the forest at night. But as the hours passed, the feeling only grew stronger until it felt like a tangible presence looming over us. We tried to distract ourselves with laughter and conversation, but it was no use. The unease lingered, hovering in the air like a thick fog. And then, just as we were about to call it a night and retreat to our tents, we heard it, a soft, whispered voice drifting through the trees. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but as the voice grew louder and more insistent, I realized that it was something else entirely. It was as if the very forest itself was speaking to us, its words unintelligible but filled with an unmistakable sense of malice. My friends exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale in the firelight as we listened to the eerie whispers that seemed to echo all around us. We knew then that something was terribly wrong, that the campground held secrets far darker than we could have ever imagined. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, their words becoming clearer and more menacing with each passing moment. We tried to ignore them, to pretend like everything was normal, but it was no use. The darkness had taken hold, and there was no escaping its grasp. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we saw them, shadowy figures flitting through the trees, their eyes gleaming in the darkness as they watched us from the safety of the shadows. We knew then that we were not alone, that the campground was haunted by the restless spirits of those who had died there long ago. With a sense of mounting dread, we realized that we had stumbled upon something far more sinister than we had ever imagined. The campground was not just a place of natural beauty, it was a place of death and despair, a graveyard for lost souls doomed to wander the earth for eternity. But even as fear threatened to consume us, we knew that we could not give in to despair. We had to find a way to appease the vengeful spirits and put an end to the curse that had plagued Whispering Pines Campground for so long. With that determination burning in our hearts, we set out into the darkness, armed with nothing but our wits and a flickering flashlight. We knew that the road ahead would be perilous, but we were willing to risk it all to save ourselves from the darkness that threatened to consume us. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, their words filling us with a sense of dread and foreboding. But we pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to uncover the truth behind the campground's dark past. And then, just as we were on the verge of giving up hope, we stumbled upon it, a crumbling gravestone hidden deep within the heart of the forest, its inscription worn away by time but still legible enough to read. It was then that we realized the truth. Whispering Pines Campground was built upon the site of an ancient burial ground, a resting place for the souls of those who had died in the forest centuries ago. And it was their restless spirits that now haunted the campground, seeking vengeance for the desecration of their final resting place. Armed with this knowledge, we set out to appease the vengeful spirits, offering prayers and blessings in the hopes of finding peace for the souls trapped within the darkness. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we felt a sense of relief wash over us, knowing that we had finally put an end to the curse that had plagued Whispering Pines Campground for so long. But even as we celebrated our victory, we knew that the darkness would always linger in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. And as we packed up our camp and prepared to leave the campground behind, we couldn't help but wonder if we would ever truly escape the whispers of the forest, or if they would follow us wherever we went, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our world. I never thought that my career as a scientist would lead me to such a terrifying ordeal. It all began when our team stumbled upon a forgotten research facility hidden deep in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. The facility had been abandoned for decades, its existence unknown to the outside world until we stumbled upon it by accident during a routine expedition. As we approached the dilapidated building, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The facility loomed before us like a monolithic tomb, its windows shattered and its walls covered in vines and moss. It was as if nature itself was reclaiming the structure, eager to erase any trace of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. Despite our reservations, we pressed on, driven by a curiosity to uncover the secrets hidden within the abandoned facility. We entered cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as we searched for any signs of life. It didn't take long for us to realize that we were not alone. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and we caught glimpses of movement out of the corners of our eyes. We dismissed them at first, attributing them to the creaks and groans of an old building settling into disrepair. But as we delved deeper into the facility, the noises grew louder and more insistent, until it felt like the very walls were alive with an unseen presence. It was then that we stumbled upon the first clue to the facility's dark past, a series of documents detailing a top-secret experiment gone horribly wrong. According to the documents, the facility had been conducting research on genetic mutations, experimenting on animals in an attempt to create the ultimate super soldier. But something had gone terribly awry, and the creatures they had created had turned on their creators, tearing through the facility and slaughtering anyone who crossed their path. As we read through the documents, a sense of dread washed over me. We were standing in the midst of a nightmare, surrounded by the remnants of a failed experiment that had unleashed untold horrors upon the world. But even as fear threatened to consume us, we knew that we couldn't turn back now. We had to confront the creatures that lurked within the facility's dark corridors and find a way to escape before it was too late. Armed with nothing but our wits and a few makeshift weapons, we set out to explore the facility and confront the mutated creatures that now roamed its halls. With each step, our hearts pounded in our chests, and the air grew thick with tension as we prepared to face whatever horrors awaited us. As we ventured deeper into the facility, the creatures grew bolder, emerging from the shadows to attack us with tooth and claw. We fought back with all our strength, but it soon became clear that we were no match for the mutated monstrosities that now prowled the halls. With our backs against the wall and nowhere left to run, we knew that our only hope of survival lay in finding a way to escape the facility and alerting the authorities to the horrors that lurked within its walls. And so, with grim determination, we pressed on, navigating the maze-like corridors in search of an exit. But just as we were on the verge of giving up hope, we stumbled upon a hidden passage leading to the surface. With a sense of relief, we raced towards the exit, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prepared to leave the nightmare behind us. As we emerged into the cool night air, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But even as we made our way back to civilization, we couldn't shake the feeling that the horrors of the abandoned facility would haunt us for the rest of our days, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurk in the darkest corners of the world. I had always been drawn to the thrill of urban exploration, the excitement of uncovering forgotten secrets hidden within the decaying walls of abandoned buildings. So when my friends suggested we visit Mercy Hospital, an abandoned medical facility in the heart of rural Pennsylvania, I jumped at the chance. We arrived at the hospital just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. The building loomed before us like a silent sentinel, its windows boarded up and its doors sealed shut. But despite its dilapidated appearance, there was something undeniably eerie about the place, a sense of unease that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. Undeterred by the ominous atmosphere, we gathered our gear and made our way inside, our footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The interior of the hospital was even more decrepit than we had expected, with peeling paint and crumbling plaster covering the walls. As we explored further, we began to encounter strange phenomena that defied explanation. Lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and we heard whispers echoing through the halls, as if the very building itself was alive with unseen spirits. At first, we brushed off the strange occurrences as mere tricks of the mind, the product of an overactive imagination in the face of the unknown. But as the night wore on, the phenomena grew more pronounced, and we began to question whether there was something more sinister at play. It was then that we stumbled upon the hospital's old psychiatric ward, a place of unspeakable horrors where the most troubled souls had been confined to languish in darkness. As we entered the ward, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a sense of overwhelming dread wash over me. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls were covered in graffiti and graffiti-covered graffiti. We ventured deeper into the ward, our footsteps echoing in the empty halls, until we came upon a room that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As we entered the room, we were greeted by a sight that chilled us to the bone. The walls were covered in strange symbols and sigils, and in the center of the room stood a lone figure, shrouded in darkness. At first, we thought the figure was a trick of the light, a mere shadow cast by the flickering lights overhead. But as we drew closer, we realized that it was something far more sinister, a grotesque entity that defied all logic and reason. Its twisted form seemed to contort and writhe in the dim illumination, casting elongated shadows that danced upon the walls like grotesque specters. As we stared in horror at the abomination before us, a wave of suffocating dread washed over me, threatening to consume me whole. Its eyes, two orbs of malevolent light, bore into our souls with an intensity that sent shivers down our spines. It seemed to radiate an aura of pure malevolence, as if it were drawing strength from the fear and despair that permeated the air. With each step we took closer to the entity, the air grew thick with an oppressive sense of foreboding, as if the very atmosphere itself had become tainted by its presence. Every instinct screamed at us to flee, to escape the clutches of this unholy abomination before it was too late. But some morbid curiosity compelled us to stay, to confront the terror that lurked within the depths of the abandoned hospital. And as we stood there, frozen in terror, the entity reached out with clawed hands, its twisted fingers curling into grotesque talons that seemed to drip with the blood of its victims. It was then that we realized the true horror of our situation. We were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape, at the mercy of a malevolent force that hungered for our souls. With a sense of mounting terror, we realized that we were not alone in the hospital, that something ancient and evil lurked within its walls, waiting to claim our souls for its own. And as the figure turned to face us, its eyes burning with a malevolent light, we knew that our only hope of survival lay in escaping the hospital before it was too late. With a sense of urgency, we turned and fled from the room, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the corridors. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt as if the hospital itself was conspiring to keep us trapped within its walls, twisting and turning in impossible ways to thwart our escape. As we reached the exit, we were greeted by a sight that filled us with terror. The door was sealed shut, its rusted hinges groaning in protest as we tried in vain to force it open. We were trapped, with no way out and the malevolent presence of the hospital closing in on us from all sides. With no other options left, we huddled together in the darkness, our minds racing with fear and uncertainty. And as the hospital's sinister presence closed in around us, we could only pray that someone would find us before it was too late.